Now, this afternoon on the show, we're discussing Ethiopia's temporary ban on citizens seeking employment abroad in a move to curb what it describes as human trafficking and torture of Ethiopians. The hashtag is Africa Speaks, but fast. A look at Africa's top story and what you could be saying about it on social media. The Central African Republic government is in talks with Uganda's LRA rebel leader Joseph Kony with an aim of having the Lord's Resistance Army leader surrender. The LRA rebels fled Uganda in 2005 after nearly 2 decades of fighting President Museveni's administration and have since continued the rebellion in the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan and Central African Republic. Joseph Kony is one of the ICC's most wanted men for allegedly committing war crimes. The United States has offered up to $5 million for leads that will lead to his arrest. And people are actually wondering whether or not he's going to be able to surrender, or is he just trying to look for an early retirement package? Now, of course, as you know, we normally have click after Web City, but today we're going to have click at the end for a very obvious reason that you will actually need to break the ice after the conversation that starts now on the platform. And we're discussing the Ethiopian government that has temporarily banned its citizens from traveling abroad for employment. And on Africa Speaks, we seek answers on whether the ban puts things right, or are we just, looking at a situation that is much bigger than the government banning its citizens from seeking employment abroad. Well, in studio, I've got guests with me, and I've got Rafael Obonyo, who is the United Nations who sits on the United Nations Habitats Advisory Board, and we also have Fitsum. We have Samuel Gebre, who is the founder of Habeshawi, and he's here as well to talk to us on what he thinks about Ethiopia and also the ban on its citizens. And online we are also going to be having Fitsum, who is based in Atlanta in the US, and we're also going to be having Dorothy Ngila, who is in South Africa. We're also going to be speaking to Melat Mengesha, who is in France, and she's an Ethiopian citizen. Well, welcome all to the show. Now, let's start by taking a look at the biggest story here, and that is whether we are looking at whether or not things are going to be put right. And in this case, we are looking at a situation where we are seeing thousands of Ethiopians going out of their country to seek employment abroad. And Ethiopia's Foreign Affairs Ministry says the temporary ban is aimed at curbing what it calls the rising tide of abuse. That is the rising tide of abuse in the country, and as well as exploitation of its citizens from the country. It says that the ban will remain until issues surrounding employment of Ethiopians abroad are addressed. And we know that this is a very big issue. Tens of thousands of Ethiopians travel overseas each year in search of work, and some rights groups now are saying that a majority who leave the country are females who are seeking domestic work in the Middle East. Now, some end up being subjected to emotional and physical abuse as well as poor working conditions. And some have died on the way traveling by road from Ethiopia through Kenya to Tanzania and then into Malawi, heading down to South Africa. Other Ethiopian migrants have died at sea and traveling on unsafe smuggling boats destined for Yemen or Italy. The Foreign Affairs Ministry says that the government has suspended the licenses of foreign employment agencies as part of the new restrictions. And there is an ethnic group in Ethiopia called the Oromo community that are complaining that they're facing increased discrimination from the government. So we're here to discuss these issues, and I would like to say thanks to my guests who are with me in studio. I'll start with Samuel. Samuel, what do you make of the situation in Ethiopia and the fact that people continue to leave the country in search of employment?
Generally speaking, today we're talking about Ethiopia, but generally speaking, we have nationals from different African countries who leave their countries in trying to look for greener pastures abroad. But in Ethiopia, it's a bit excessive, and it's been highlighted a lot, especially with the talk about Saudi Arabia right now. That's because the levels of Ethiopians in Saudi Arabia are huge, and the reactions by the Saudis has really put them on the limelight.
Right.
We've also had the same stories happening about Kenyan maids in Saudi dying. Yeah? So just to answer your question, is basically it's the situation in Ethiopia seems less favorable than what they see to be abroad, either in Saudi or in Europe or in the States. And when you also have your relatives or your friends who at some point went abroad and you see that their lives seem to be a bit better than your life, you decide, let me take the risk and go and try and help my family back home.
Okay, and Raphael, I would like to pick your brain as well. Do you think that the ban is a solution to the problem at hand?
Not at all. Personally, I don't think the ban is a solution, because the problem is bigger than Ethiopia. The problem is bigger than what has happened in Saudi Arabia, because they look at it this way. Africa is the second largest and second most populated, most youthful continent. Almost 200 million people are young people between 15 and 24. But a majority of these people are unemployed. I mean, we have 60% of jobless people are actually young people. These people need to survive. They need employment. They need gainful opportunities. And if they can't get that within their borders, they have to go elsewhere. So if governments within the African continent cannot provide employment opportunities for them, then they have to find other ways. And one of the ways is to move out of their countries, out of their borders. I mean, now we're talking about the case that is being highlighted about Ethiopia, but also because, you know, Ethiopia is the second most populated country in Africa, about 90 million people. And so you can imagine trying to provide opportunities, employment opportunities for all these people can be quite a task. So the spotlight is on Ethiopia for that reason. But I don't think coming up with restrictions like, having a ban on people that they can't travel out of the country is going to be a solution, not for Ethiopia, not for any country in Africa, unless there's a comprehensive plan on how then do we create employment opportunities for people who are being repatriated, for young people who are in the country, and if we can't do that, then that might not be a solution.
Right. Samuel, I would like to know from you, knowing that there's a ban, necessary or unnecessary, some people are divided on this, but from your own experience, there are all kinds of issues going on in Ethiopia, and I read about an issue. In fact, there was a journalist who was explaining to me about a community or an ethnic group called the Oromos. They say the reason they're leaving the country is because they're discriminated against. Do you think there's anything like that in Ethiopia?
Okay, first of all, the ban was put a highlight in the government's position in trying to figure out a solution to the problem. The ban would not bring a solution itself. But I'm sure the government has been trying over a period of years to bring a solution to the situation of especially women in Saudi Arabia who are of Ethiopian nationals, because they get mistreatment leading into death. So the ban basically just puts the highlight on that so that they can concentrate on trying to bring a solution. On the second question, it's basically the same. Okay, I can give the example of Kenya. The different tribalistic differences that we have also definitely do happen in Ethiopia. That's something that is generally happening all across Africa.
Right.
So in Ethiopia, we have different tribes, and those different tribes have different differences, politically, economically, and religiously as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and now let's just connect with our online contributors as well, and we'll start by listening to Dorothy Ngila, who is contributing to us from South Africa. Dorothy, why exactly do you think this is becoming an increased problem, not only in Ethiopia, but other African countries?
They are leaving the continent because we have issues around poverty, we have issues around the lack of employment for young people, we have issues around our education systems not producing the kind of entrepreneurial people that we want to be able to develop our economies. And so we have numbers of people that are leaving to go and look for these opportunities elsewhere. I think the proclamation by the Ethiopian government that they would like to keep more of their nationals in Ethiopia is not really about whether it should have been said. I think the question really is around whether the government can provide any better options for these young people and others who are leaving.
Well, thanks a lot, Dorothy. And Dorothy puts it right. She says it's not just Ethiopia, but it's also the other African countries. People living and you know, they're living for different reasons, employment opportunities. And you see what's happening in Ethiopia actually puts the problem out even more clearly, that we might be facing the same problems as Africans. And it's not just Ethiopians that are suffering in the United Arab Emirates. This cuts across. But then where do you think the solution is, Raphael?
I think for me the solution, and I've always argued that Africa is not a poor continent. I mean, countries in Africa are not necessarily poor. What we don't have are people who can help us to manage our resources. I mean, we have leadership crisis within the continent. You and I know that just the other month, Mo Ibrahim Foundation did not give, for the second year running, do not give out the Africa Leadership Award. They said none of these leaders really merits this award. Isn't that, I mean, an indicator that there's a crisis of leadership, that we have leaders who are leading us to the sea and we are comfortably following them. Right. So for me, I think we must fix our leadership, but also we must also have a leadership that serves the will and the interest of the people, because that is, again, something that hasn't happened. And that's why I'm arguing. I mean, of course, I sympathize with what has happened to, I mean, to Ethiopians and foreigners who go to other countries and face a lot of discriminations. And I mean, it's really a painful thing. But I think for African governments, for them to be able to deal with this problem, it's not just about saying people shouldn't leave. You guys can't leave anymore because you're facing torture and discrimination outside. But it is about providing gainful opportunities for these people so they can stick around, because they don't leave because they want to leave. I wouldn't leave Kenya if I had an option to stay in Kenya and have some sort of a gainful employment. Great.
Now let's speak or connect to Fitsum. Fitsum is based in Atlanta, the US, and he's a practicing physician. Fitsum, what do you think the problem is from your own understanding, and more importantly, that you are an Ethiopian living outside of the country?
So my opinion about this is it can partly solve the problem as an emergency last measure of a desperate act to stop the ongoing abuse, because still there are people who want to go there. At least we can stop future abuses. Most importantly, this travel ban doesn't address the root cause of the problem. That's poverty, lack of education, gender inequality, lack of women empowerment. All these things are factors that drive young women out of the country and cross borders illegally or legally. The government should be able to enforce memorandum of understanding with these countries to create comfortable situations for our citizens working there. International labor rights should be respected, human rights should be respected, and the government should have a leverage to say no to this kind of abuses on its citizens.
Well, I'll now want to find out from you, Samuel, what do you think about Fitsum's contribution right there?
I actually do agree with what he's saying. Just to put it in perspective, it's a state of mind. That if you're living in Ethiopia and your state of mind is not, you're not settled in a manner that you can actually be able to do, a job that will give you a living, or educate your children, or take your family to a good school, then your state of mind will not be settled. So you try and figure out what is out there, and then you see, we have had Ethiopians living in the country since 1970 during the communism time, and then during the war in 91. And then you see their lives out there seems to be a bit better. So you decide, okay, maybe I will have a settled mindset living in the Western countries or in Middle East. So that, I think, is a thing. I tried going back to Ethiopia. I lived in Kenya for a while. But the state of mind, they did not let me settle. And Kenya was where I felt like I settled mentally. Yeah. So I guess that's what they're looking for. Obviously, the poverty is obvious. The levels of education, you don't get it.
Right.
And then you also have other issues, socially, economically, politically, and whatnot, that will push you generally to look for better pastures out there.
Great. And in case you're watching us, we're using the hashtag #AfricaSpeaks, and you can be able to connect with us and contribute as well. You can tweet us or reach us on Facebook, or you can actually send us a video comment. If you're fast enough to do that, you can record it and send it to us here on Africa Speaks. Now, let's connect again to a student, a finance student in France, that is Melat Mengesha, who would like to also contribute. Melat, if you can hear me, what do you think is the reason people are continuously leaving the country, and also why do you think there's a bigger problem in Ethiopia than just people living in search of employment?
I know that there are migration trends from Ethiopia mostly linked to a context of poverty and conflict. Historically, the first waves of migration in the late 80s were linked to a conflict, and people were seeking safety and security. But most people would agree that the current migration is caused by numerous factors. And these factors can include the influence of globalization, the influence of traffickers and facilitators, the high unemployment rate and hardship inside the country, but also the influence and peer pressure from those living abroad, the diaspora. But there is one common motivation for this contemporary migration, and it's economic security. So the migrants abroad mostly occupy unskilled jobs that include domestic work, industry, and construction work for the majority. But there's also highly qualified and professional workers that migrate seeking better paychecks and better living conditions.
And there we go. Melat puts the problem even more clearer. She says seeking a better paycheck, and she talks about the different kinds of jobs that Ethiopian nationals go out to do there. These are jobs that all the other African countries' citizens go to do when they're seeking employment in the diaspora. But now let's see what you have to say on social media, that is on Twitter and Facebook. Well, we're seeing at Freddie Morgan 81, who is saying, where is the African Union on this? And also still on Twitter, we are also looking at one coming in here from Jonah Okal, who is saying the solution is to differentiate human labor, and trafficking agents are after money, and therefore there's nothing that can be done unless you have to connect this to the International Labour Organization. When you look at the generation in Ethiopia, and as well as Africa as a whole, we are looking at a reasonably youthful generation. And this is a generation that is full of energy, very energetic. Samuel, if you might, what do you think is the solution?
Well, as you mentioned, and as a known fact, that half or 50% of the youth in the urban areas are unemployed. We've seen some initiatives in not just only in Ethiopia, but in major African countries, that the government tries to put initiatives such as, come in a group and, come up with an initiative and they'll try and support you. Such initiatives are there. But we, the youth, in conjunction with the government, need to decide that we are the ones who are supposed to build this country for the future. But when there is struggle for power in the ruling area, and then there is a lot of negative mentality in the youth, there is a conflict. So what we have to do is just try and work together, get rid of that conflict, and build a nation.
Great. And well, let's hear more from you on Facebook. I'm sure there's quite a lot that is on Facebook that people actually did respond to throughout the week. Let's just look at some of them. On social media, we asked, what are your thoughts on Ethiopia's temporary ban on its citizens seeking employment abroad? On Facebook, D. Rolla wonders how it will be successfully implemented, taking into consideration citizens' rights to freedom. Eric Moranga says it simply means one thing: they have adequate or inadequate skilled labor, and if not, maybe they seek foreign employment because the government doesn't provide enough job opportunities to its citizens, or there is a lot of employment for expatriates. Susan Amase adds, if it's temporarily, then the government seeks to achieve a given objective, for example, improving pay for its workers, creating more jobs, etc. Julius Mbaluto says citizens have the right to choose where they should pursue their dreams and where they reckon they will connect with their destiny. Banning is imposing something on people who didn't want it in the first place. Can this government provide the right environment for its citizens to realize their dreams? Can this government know what these citizens want, their choices and aspirations? Can this government assure them prosperity at home if they can't have any other choices? On YouTube, Mike J says, it is about time shipping Ethiopian youngsters as slaves to Arab countries stopped. The level of abuse against Ethiopians in the Middle East is very disturbing. On Twitter, @LevelyNetic says, that's a good measure to curb cases of guys being mistreated abroad. SVETS M1 asks, what alternative are they giving their citizenry considering most are unemployed or escaping deplorable conditions? Have they put in place measures that will guarantee them jobs in their country? Those are some of the opinions coming through YouTube and Facebook as well as Twitter. Some of them I just read. Raphael, if I might get back to you, and as we come to a close of the program, we're having so many Africans going out to the diaspora to seek employment under unfavorable conditions sometimes. What do you think will be able to motivate them to come back home and take up jobs that are back in their home countries?
Thanks. I think first of all I must say that immigration is not a bad thing. I mean, it's both a challenge and an opportunity, both for the, from the demand and the supply side. So
right.
I think it's not something that we can demonize or stop. I mean, and Saudi Arabia argues the same way, and everyone argues the same way, that we need people to move. I mean, both as a human rights issue, but also in terms of ensuring that labor moves around. That is one thing. But two, also, I mean, like I said, Africa is a youthful continent, and young people, we are a borderless generation. I don't just want to leave, be born and grow up in Kenya, work in Kenya. I want to explore other opportunities.
Right.
We are a very competitive generation, so people have a freedom to move. But I think the challenge to African countries and the African continent is to make sure that they make their countries very competitive, that people don't have to leave. I mean, if I am to decide whether to stay in Kenya or to stay in another country, I'll say, I want to live in Kenya because the environment is conducive. But look at it, I mean, like I already told you, 60% of jobless people are young people. They also need decent livelihoods. They need good lives. So what do? They have to seek opportunities elsewhere. So what we need to do is to tap on the talent, skills, energies, dynamism of these young people and bring them, make sure we use them to grow and to develop our countries. And if we don't do that, I like what Kofi Annan says, that a society that does not tap into the creativity and energies of its young people is going to be left behind. And that is exactly what is going to happen, and that is exactly what you're seeing happening now.
Awesome. Now let's link up to Dorothy. Dorothy, who is still with us via video link. Dorothy, what are your final remarks?
But I think that what we need to have a look at is what options do they have back home. There is a huge potential for agricultural development in Ethiopia, but we need to look at, do we have the capacity to be able to produce optimally in terms of agricultural productivity? Do we have the right infrastructural development to ensure that the agricultural produce is getting to the markets and all that kind of stuff that comes with having a booming agricultural sector? Are we able to give other opportunities for younger people to be able to gain good employment where they feel like their talents and their skills are being used optimally? And those are the big questions that the Ethiopian government needs to be asking itself.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. That is Dorothy Ngila connecting to us from South Africa. Now let's hear from Melat Mengesha, who is in France. Mengesha, what do you think? What kind of Ethiopia would you like to see? And also, why do you think that Ethiopians need to return home?
As for myself, I am pursuing my master's in Europe, and I am going back at the end of this year. For those seeking to go abroad, looking for employment, I would say rethink it as many times as possible. Be more open to internal opportunities. We all need to be more aware and open our eyes to the booming economy of the country and be able to seize opportunities and seek opportunities and be more proactive about our conditions.
Well, thanks a lot, Melat Mengesha. She is Ethiopian, and she was giving us her remarks as well. But thank you so much. And as we come to a close, Samuel, I would like to know from you, if you were to be motivated to go back to Ethiopia, what kind of Ethiopia would you like to see when you return home?
Speaking of motivation, while I speak to my other Ethiopian friends across the world, we all want to go back home.
Right.
Like, who wouldn't want to go back to their motherland? Yeah? Any African who is a migrant living somewhere else would want to go back to the place where they were born. And I've also talked to others who went back to Ethiopia, tried to start up businesses, tried to get jobs in Ethiopia. But majority faced certain challenges, especially when trying to open up a business. There's so many regulations, so many rules, so many people you have to know. But those are problems that also exist in other African countries. So as Melat was saying finally, I guess it's for each individual to look for those opportunities that are there, and then also for the government to try and make it more favorable for the foreigners to be coming back, because all that education that you got in the West, all that experience you got in the West, it's a benefit for the African nation. I guess that's what South Korea did. They had a lot of migrants living in the early years, and then when they went back, they built the nation.
Great. Well, I would like to say thank you both for joining me on the show this afternoon. It was such an honor having you, Samuel Gebre, who is a founder of Habeshawi, and also we're having Rafael Obonyo, who sits on the United Nations Habitats Advisory Board, and we also had Melat Mengesha, who is joining us from France, a finance student, and Dorothy Ngila, a Kenyan professional in South Africa, who is joining us from South Africa. Thank you all for making this show a success, and this conversation continues online under the hashtag Africa Speaks. Today we actually did have our conversation about Ethiopia and just how the Ethiopian government has temporarily banned its citizens from seeking employment abroad, especially in the United Arab Emirates. And thank you all for your contributions. My name is Joy Doreen Biira. My Twitter handle at Joy Doreen Biira. Now at 9 o'clock, don't forget to watch The Job Center. It will be coming up with Najma Ismail. Up next is Sports Final with Joshua Kemboy.